Hey there, welcome to episode 143 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo, as usual. We're recording this at 8:24 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time here in Greater Vegas on Wednesday, August 5, 2026. We normally publish new episodes of Quaggling Sand on Wednesdays, often in the morning. 2 check marks today. Today's title and topic, Kitchen Confidential, as in the Anthony Bourdain book. The book that made him famous, arguably. Hopefully if you've never heard of the Quaggling Sand audio program, let me tell you, this is the place. This is a personal vanity project of sorts, telling and retelling of stories, tales, memories, days gone by. It's sort of the reason I'm talking about Kitchen Confidential today. One, I'm re-listening to the audiobook, and I'll get into that briefly. I'm re-listening to it. I've listened to it many times. And also, it's sort of a reflection on my own project here, Quaggling Sand, which sort of aligns, kind of, sort of. So I figured I'd comment on that today. Quaggling Sand, by the way, is a technical term I coined when I was very young. You will probably know it better as pins and needles. That sensation you get when circulation returns to a limb, usually. A hand or a foot or maybe an arm or a leg. If you've been sitting funny, maybe even hilariously. Quaggling Sand, of course. From this perspective, it is the swirling of memories in the mind. And who knows what will come out. And today we're going to think back to the Kitchen Confidential days in relation. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a reasonably brief summary. There are some links, the 2 usual show links, and then 2 regarding Kitchen Confidential, the book. So let's get to it on this lovely, warming Wednesday morning. The summary, I checked this book out in audio form from the digital counter at my local library countless times. I find it fascinating for reasons that I cannot quite explain, though it was quite popular with a great many people. So I will try to explain anyway. Let me put it so. So I will try to explain anyway. The Quaggling Sand homepage, quaggling is spelled just like it sounds, QUOGGLING quagglingsand.com, no spaces. Someday that will be a worthwhile website to visit. Profile page linking everything, buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo has been around for over 5 years. It was 5 years in March, so coming up on 5.5. You do not have to spend any money there, but I do use it as the profile page as a kind of a link tree, a freeform link tree. So it points to all of my various media productions, various projects. There's some biographical information. There are some affiliate links for things I actually use. And of course, you can buy me a coffee if you want. You, again, don't have to, but all proceeds through this portal do go towards the purchase of coffee beans and or accessories. Coffee is what makes all of this possible. I probably don't drink enough of it. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts is where you will find the Buy Me an Update audio program, where it is initially posted. It used to be exclusively posted there. No special deals with Buy Me a Coffee or anything. I just figured, I've had this page forever. Why not make use of it? And nobody listens to podcasts through the Buy Me a Coffee website. So 2 hours later, the Buy Me an Update is published everywhere else that I publish everything. It's 5 minutes or less, published on Monday mornings. The previous week's audio program topics and news and announcements upcoming. It's a place where I can make announcements once and make sure that I do that rather than forgetting to mention something in a different audio program. The links for today, Kitchen Confidential, the Wikipedia page for the Kitchen Confidential book, so you get some background and so on. You can also click through to the Anthony Bourdain page to get more specific information about the author. Quite an adventure with an unfortunate end. Kitchen Confidential. And Bourdain, the definitive oral biography, was made by his colleagues and friends, and his assistant of 10 years put the work together. It's an interesting listen. It's an audiobook. So yeah, if you're interested, I did listen to it. It was interesting. Of course, these sorts of things are a little bit sad, we'll say. Surely they would have preferred to give their recollections under better circumstances, but that's the way it is. Now on to the rest of the show, the book. Now, this is not a book review per se. The world acknowledged at the time that Anthony Bourdain, despite his fiction writing efforts, was actually a pretty decent teller of stories, and I agree. Maybe since the stories were based on his own experiences, if not retellings of them specifically. That's been, I think he mentions it, and then it's been shown many times that like people trying to guess who the characters were since he changed many names and so on. I think it has been made clear over the years that the stories were rooted in reality, though names were changed, as I just mentioned. Some things were made humorous, situations were combined, ordering was changed, and so on, but it's the general idea. It's based on real events, or as they are recalled, perhaps. And I think he mentions more than once in Kitchen Confidential that his fiction writing efforts up till the point where he's writing this book were not overly successful. And then the trip to Japan was with regard to one of his books. Interesting story, I suppose. But yeah, better at a kind of a Howard Stern model, better at just being himself, I guess you could say. There was a quote from Francis Ford Coppola on the set of the infamous Apocalypse Now movie, which you should see if you have not, wherein Coppola, describes the production. Quote, "My film is not a movie. My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam. It's what it was really like. It was crazy. We were in the jungle. There were too many of us. We had access to too much money, too much equipment. And little by little, we went insane." Unquote. End quote. So I kind of get the sense that Kitchen Confidential was a little bit like that. Bourdain refers to Apocalypse Now. Let me spell refers correctly. 2 E's, not 3. He refers to Apocalypse Now twice explicitly in the book, once with regard to the opening sequence at the Doors playing the opening theme, and later the scene at the Do Lung Bridge where there is apparently nobody in charge. Maybe these were harbingers, indicators of a darker view mixed in with various optimistic takes through the book. The benefit of hindsight skews the interpretation, to be sure. I talked about this book in episodes 34 and 108 of this very audio program that I usually prefer to listen to audiobooks read by the author if possible, since they usually bring some insight to the narration that isn't on the page. This is not always true, but I think with this book it most definitely was and is. By the way, for me, this read is much easier at about 1.2 speed. Here again, it may be telling that at 1.0 times speed, the read is a little bit down. It's not as energetic, I guess you could say. So maybe at 1 time speed, it's letting something through that at 1.2 is filtered out. Posterity, something to think about for later. There are hints of this, that he was writing this story to get it out there, maybe for someone to look back at some time. Anyone with aspirations will probably have a tendency to want to tell a story about what they were experiencing, what they are learning along the way, where they hope all this will lead, and so on. There are some disclaimers. Let me correct that spelling. I updated Obsidian, which is my note-taking and script writing platform of choice, and it had turned off spell checking. So I had to return it on. And so there are a couple things that are now indicated as misspelling. So there are some disclaimers up front about not necessarily wanting to upset in the book, he's saying them, or he wrote them. Not necessarily wanting to upset his peers and colleagues. He wanted to continue being a chef. He says that explicitly. So changes to names and places and events are to be expected. The question at the time would have been whether a writer of fiction would have sprinkled facts into his autobiography-ish, there you go, work, or maybe sprinkled some autobiography into the fictional work. Who can say? Friends, family, colleagues, several people assembled a posthumous biography driven by his former assistant of 10 years, Laurie Woolever, this was somewhat interesting and gives some of the other details that, as is almost always true, as is almost always the case from my reading into other similar situations where there is at the time, were there at the time, but become more clear later, after the fact. Maybe I should have a drink of water before I continue tangling this up. The biography was an interesting read, which was actually an audiobook, so it was a listen. I'm kind of on the fence as to whether you call listening to an audiobook reading. I do read quite a bit, so to me they're very similar, but your mileage may vary. So it was an interesting thing, sort of wrapping up the life of the guy with observations, looking over the proverbial fence from different angles, filling in some questions with answers or suppositions. I can't say I was a fan of all things Anthony Bourdain. I may have seen him on Top Chef. I did used to watch that show. I can't remember if I saw him specifically. Maybe. I didn't know who he was at the time, almost certainly. Or maybe a clip from the show. And I have not watched an entire episode of his traveling food show or his other various things. So the topic is interesting, but just especially now that he is gone, it's kind of strange. They keep replaying his stuff. So maybe I'll catch it at some point. I don't know. He is a good storyteller, though. Not everyone will grow up to be famous or infamous, but I do think an accounting in one's own voice, whether literally with a voice or video recording or collection of recordings, or by way of the written word, then narrated, ideally in the author's voice, is an interesting artifact to leave behind for those who do follow. It may be friends and family, it may be a more interested public audience, or somewhere in between. I personally view this audio program as a form of this, though before you pause and wonder, I have no leanings as Bourdain did. The world and the people in it are far too interesting and annoying to bug out early, even if people do suck. I have not yet met them all, so the story shall continue so long as I can recall them. I mean, I haven't met everyone, so I can't say everybody sucks, but I've met a lot of them. I actually kind of think that was his problem. He was disappointed in people, but the way you handle that is a personal choice, I suppose. Youth. So I'm going to divide the book up into three broad sections that I can identify with, I suppose. So youth, early in the book, he looks back at visits to France with his family and the sudden interest in trying all things food, accepting unusual options as a challenge, the oyster story on the boat, the being stuck in the car with his brother at La Pyramide. These are our little milestones. The opposite of a picky eater, the description of trying oysters and other exotic foods was a little bit graphic, but almost certainly a fork in his road, well described. I myself was a picky eater when I was young. The limits of adventure in my early days was maybe having shark steaks after we caught them out in the Charlotte Harbor when I was visiting my grandparents in Florida around age 10. That was pretty adventurous, I think. But there was also liver at the grandparents' home, which I avoided with some confrontation with both grandparents, viewing food as something of a test. They were the type of people that would say, well, you have to sit there until you eat it. So I just sat there forever. They would have preferred Bourdain, I think. Here's some liver. Ooh, give me some more. The actual interesting part, though, is the impact of these early life experiences, the formative years for some, including him, certainly, and how they unfold later. Obviously, he went into food preparation as a trained chef, the focus of most of the book. But it turns out he was more interesting, drawn more obviously to the way food appears in culture and life, more so than its preparation, by him anyway. So I personally think he was more interested in food than in preparing the food, if that makes sense. I was exposed to computers fairly early on and took an interest. I have been a computer engineer for decades, but in what I would say is a similar sort of transition, I am far more interested in technology and what we do with it than in sitting in a cubicle for 80 hours per week writing code. So I can see that as something of a parallel, which I think you only learn by doing. That is, after sitting in a cubicle for 80 hours a week, you realize this is not exactly what I had in mind, but I still like computers. So that part's fine. Inside technology, computers are a part of that. Inside baseball, the thing that makes this book so interesting for most, especially when it was first published, is the behind the scenes aspect, the insider view behind the swinging doors of various kitchens, the life of the kitchen staff, and of course, the chef. We are getting a look at the real story, put that in quotes if you like, in the kitchens of restaurants some may have visited contemporaneously. And I find this fascinating, even if it is offered with some dramatic license, which he admits and which has been determined over the many years since it was published. I've read some books. By the way, his follow-on, is it Media Rare? Medium something. That was also an interesting book, but by then he was not up and coming. He was more arrived. So it just had a completely different tone, but it was also read by him. You can find it if you look for it. It will be readily apparent. But I have only gone through that one, I think, twice. It's not as appealing. I have read some books about the old Silicon Valley days. One in particular focused on internet and cell phone technologies, especially Netscape for the browser and Apple for the iPhone. It was sort of a history of the internet, and those are two major signposts along the way. And it mentioned many people by name with whom I worked way back when, at both of those companies and other places, along with some of the stories that unfolded along the way that have brought us to the trouble we are all in today. There is something to be said for these perspectives to provide some idea how challenging the final products we actually experience, whether a complicated meal or an intricate piece of technology, is to actually produce. So yeah, what's going on in the kitchen at these various tech bro companies today? We can only cower and shudder. The most interesting part, I think, is how appealing it was to get through the various challenges, always facing castle intrigue, disloyal comrades, physical injury, fatigue, you name it. I'm speaking mostly of Anthony Bourdain and his book at this point, but I have to say there was very little knife work in my professional pursuits, but generally speaking, I can sort of identify with this stuff. The all-nighters to make a release date, other all-nighters to solve some challenge, to make a milestone or reverse engineer some essential functionality, the workplace politics and coworker drama, and so on. I think there's always a story or a collection of stories behind anything that has its own culture and population of participants with special knowledge, working too much, and contending with more than the thing we think they focus on when we look in from the outside. And that's certainly true in many professions and many vertical focal areas in my experience. Number 3, he went to Japan. This is a part of the book that comes out of left field. It almost doesn't fit in with the rest of the book, but I think he included it because it was so impactful at the time, and then, of course, in his career. Most of the stories, other than the family trips to France, take place in and around New York, with a trip to Baltimore in there somewhere, working for the Silver Shadow, if I recall, with some expressed longings to get out, but always a return to the notion that this was his comfort zone, where he could always find the next kitchen to work in, eventually. He specifically mentions preferring his kitchen colleagues to fellow authors, for example. He didn't fancy himself an author or creator of stories so much as a creator of food, as he wrote. The trip to Japan was clearly moving, a culture shock, of course, and a reintroduction to the place food and eating fit into life in a faraway place. I tend to think that this trip brought back those childhood memories wherein he discovered food as part of an overall experience, something to be excited about in situ rather than preparing it all the time, night after night. Maybe there's I often describe my lack of interest in playing computer game or lack of being a gamer. Now, this is not to say I don't play random games on my phone, or I didn't play a game or two now and then on my actual desktop computer. But I am absolutely not a gamer. In fact, I had a PlayStation and I got rid of it because I was like, I never really use it. I got it because it seemed like it would be fun. There's another story in there from True Vision, but as it turns out, it mostly sat there. I would tell people I work with computers. I don't consider them, for myself, I don't consider them leisure and entertainment. So Maybe that comes into play here. I don't know. Yeah, I like if I was, especially if I was a game developer, I personally would not be interested in continuing to play games. Although I guess as a matter of research, it might be something. I myself went to Japan, my first international travel for a role at True Vision of all places, in around 1995. This was after the group It's not a group you want to hang out with, probably. Left a little something in the Shinjuku train station just about a month prior. So they consider this a domestic terrorism act, which was always interesting to be so close to. This was a train station we passed through almost daily. We were staying at the Shinjuku Hyatt, and we would walk to the Shinjuku train station. Strangely, there were no garbage cans or any places to discard anything, and there was a strong police presence. So almost daily for most of the visit that we were there. We then went to Osaka, and then we flew home from there. I had many interesting food experiences I think we were there for like 9 days, though I was actually more interested in the travel parts, from the airport to the flight to the hotels and moving around, the Tokyo train system, the commuter train system, subways, the taxis, obviously the language, the culture and meetings, the way people interacted, and so on and so on and so on, figuring out where we were, which was a mystery most of the time, where we were supposed to be headed, and so on and so on. I do believe that with more and more photos of most spots on the planet available to all thanks to the internets, being in a new place in person is quite the other thing. And I think more people should actually do that, and not, there's nothing wrong with taking pictures and posting them and then looking at them, but going places and experiencing, not as a tourist necessarily, but actually being there, you could say living there temporarily, is quite the other thing. The take home for me, I could probably get a total count of the number of times I checked out the audiobook from the library, but it was more than a dozen. At 1.2x, the Bourdain narration is solid, with those insights I mentioned littered through the intonations and pacing, along with a few audio oddities. So in other words, when the author reads the book, they are not reading the page, they are telling the story, and it happens to be written down in front of them. So they get to go back in time, or they get to walk the same path they wrote on the page. The difference between an artist and a craftsman, or a craftsperson perhaps, in the kitchen context was one nugget I retain. A little aha moment, and there were several through the course of the book. I don't think this still happens, but I did notice every few listens that there were parts I would miss and pick up on the next go-around. The Christmas tree move, when he and his wife Nancy moved the tree after it was sitting for way too long. Every once in a while, if I would have the book again, I would go through it, and then I would think, wait, what were they talking about? And so eventually I remembered to actually pay attention during that particular moment. Christmas tree, of course. I think that's the mark of interesting writing, when there's a little bit something, a little something extra when you listen or watch a movie again on a rewatch or a re-listen. Like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Or yeah, there are some words that he pronounces in an unusual way. What do I know about meat? That one's an interesting one, because the title of that chapter kind of gives it away, unless you're not paying attention, or unless you don't know that it's going to give it away. Kind of a silly story, actually. Kind of an indication of just how unsure of himself he was, I suppose. I think I identify with the sentiments of the arc in general, the arc of the book, but not the specifics. I went through the 3 broad topics that align with my own experiences, but I honestly think this book was almost an act of desperation, with his previous fictional writings not getting him to where he wanted to be, and, from his own description, his chefly pursuits not quite getting him there either. Of course, I got a reminder pop up here. Where am I? Of course, his sad and untimely end is cause for re-examination of words and actions over his lifespan, a lesson of sorts for some. I will add that Tony Hsieh may be better known in the Greater Vegas area than elsewhere. The Zappos guy, the Downtown Project guy, did something similar with his Delivering Happiness book, which I also listened to as read by him right around the time of his untimely end. And the book was likewise interesting through that lens. I'll have more to say in the conclusion about that. In general, though, I think there is value in recalling and telling stories, written or spoken or otherwise, for posterity at least. Who knows, somewhere along the way, someone might be curious. There may be some fame that will lead to more curiosity. Who can say? Who can say at all what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, a decade from now? If nothing else, it is always good to test the memory now and then, capturing it for others or for just yourself. It's a worthwhile pursuit, whether you are becoming or you are or become whether you are or become famous. There you go, and maybe even infamous. Or not. You might not become any of those things. Someone somewhere might be curious at some point, maybe long after you are around to answer. Sometime in the distant future, someone will be listening to this very episode and say, oh yeah, I remember the 2026 time frame 100 years ago. Yeah, I can't believe these files are still around. In the meantime, it keeps your memories refreshed if you use them now and then, which is ultimately it's one of the core reasons that I've been producing 143 episodes of this very audio program. I am not famous, as far as I know. So a closing comment, the Delivering Happiness book had a similar sort of hidden layer of sorts to it. If you've never read that book, once again, being able to listen to it as read by Tony Hsieh himself was, I think, very telling. These indicating to me a certain amount of sadness or disappointment, maybe. I found it to be sort of maybe telling. I don't know. Tony Hsieh did have issues. I met him in person maybe 2 or 3 times. And in general, his antics were just odd. His views were a little bit flippant, almost desperate. I don't know. But still, you should express yourself. Someone down the road will be curious to know your deal. In Tony's case, he wrote the book before he departed, of course. But having read it after, I think it took a different sort of tone, or had a different tone. Maybe a little, I took something different from it than I think he probably intended, but I think he let that stuff slide. And I think Anthony Bourdain did something similar. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I think it comes through. Maybe I'll try to read some more books by people in similar circumstances, I suppose. I don't know. Especially if they're read by the author. I can't stress that enough. I think now there are some books that are read by the author that are just not good. They actually take something away. I think in those cases, it's because the author brings, or doesn't allow themselves, maybe brings nothing to it. Nothing in as far as the intonation, the pauses, the cadence. Whether they don't speed up or slow down in certain spots that are interesting. You can tell when the author is sort of in the situation that they're describing. I actually just went through this part as I'm re-listening to Kitchen Confidential, where they're putting together their kitchen crew for yet another adventure in another kitchen, and they're trying to find people to recruit into this new adventure. And this seems to happen a lot where you're moving. So you're like, hey, come with us. You want to go work here? Okay. And he is very clearly telling the story as he's recalling it. And he's, instead of saying, can they still work the line? He changed the tone. He says, can they still work the line? Like he adds that little bit of energy. So I that's just one example. There's, I think an author who reads their own book, who can bring that stuff, I think that makes it a little bit more interesting. So I do that here. And by the way, no AI here. I always read my own stories. I write them and then I read them to you with interjections. I have not written any of this down. So there's occasional interjections of improvisation, but who knows? Who knows if those are better or not? Anyway, I do enjoy the book. This was a more brief episode than I thought. This is actually a lot of writing. Typically, this many words would have been more like 40 or 45 minutes, but I guess I went through it quickly. Anyway, I do like the book. Like I said, I'll tell you what the name of the book is. It's it is Medium Raw. It should have been Media Raw, to be honest. But because it was a lot of commentary about his time in television and the transition between chef and being a celebrity of sorts and all sorts of other things. But anyway, I don't want to, it's an okay book. It's fine. He does start off by telling people, no, you can, everything has changed. You can go to the fish market and all that stuff. So I think he probably was addressing some of the fist shaking commentary on don't tell people not to have fish on Thursdays or whatever, fish on Mondays. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that today. Thank you for listening as always. I have some water. Clearly I need some. Hang on a second. All right. That didn't really help, but thanks for listening as always. And come back next week and who knows what I'll talk about then. And don't forget to listen to all the previous episodes. You have 142 other episodes to listen to, and you can listen to episode 0 if you want. That's it. Thanks for listening. Check out buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo for links to all of my other audio programs. Who knows? There may be something else of interest in the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program or FFS Talk, maybe Cafe Genius Impresarios, or the never scheduled and due for another episode, Coffee Solo. That's all I have to say about that. Take care. Until next time. Bye-bye.